Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Rebecca Cardona here with Fear Nothing Coaching. Today, during our time together, I thought we would explore a little bit of the truth around boundaries. So we have all heard of the word boundaries, setting boundaries. That's my boundary. And for some of us, we're very clear on what boundaries are and what they mean. And for others, not so much. And, that's quite okay. So our time together, we'll be talking a little bit and understanding a little bit more in detail about boundaries. So what are boundaries? Well, simply put, boundaries are ways that we communicate. They're either ways that we're communicating or they're ways that we're not communicating. So truly, simply put, boundaries are communication skills, right? And our boundaries can come in many different packages and many different forms. So for example, we have physical boundaries. We can have emotional boundaries. We can have mental boundaries. We can have spiritual boundaries. We can have relational boundaries and more. So again, boundaries are ways that we communicate, or they're communication skills, or they're ways in which we're not communicating. So for some of us, boundaries aren't that familiar. We may have heard of them, but we truly don't know what they are, and we really don't necessarily use them or practice them within our lifestyle. So hopefully this talk will be helpful, to those in which boundaries aren't as clear. So as I mentioned, they can come in many different forms and packages. So let's start off with the physical boundary, right? A physical boundary can be just as simple as space. When you're talking to a person and they're talking to you, what is the physical space in which you're comfortable with? And in the United States, most of the cultures within the United States are comfortable with an arm's distance length of communicating. So if I jumped in here and had the talk like this, that's a physical space boundary that may not necessarily be so comfortable for you, or that you not necessarily may like. So an emotional boundary, right? So for me, if I am going to be able to communicate effectively with others in the realm of emotion, I need to be able to trust, and I need to also know that the individual or the individuals trust me. So a boundary for emotions when it comes for me is trust. Another big emotional boundary that's important to me, and you can think about what yours may be, is follow through. So if I'm going to communicate effectively and have good relationships that are safe and healthy, then I need to be able to, one, trust, right? And also trust that the individual, for the most part, is going to follow through, and that they're going to trust that I will do the same. So what about a mental boundary? Again, I'm just giving you some of mine. Yours are going to be different, and that's quite okay because they need to be unique for you. But a mental boundary for me is stay in the day and don't predict the future. Because if I allow my mind to jump ahead and begin to predict the future and understand what the future is going to hold and to read into that, that I begin to assume and internalize all of those emotions, whether they ever come to life or they don't. So a mental boundary for me is being able to not predict the future and stay in the day. Spiritual. A spiritual boundary for me is no judgment of the self or others. And then lastly, a relational boundary for me, as I interact and communicate with others effectively, is no screaming. So again, I'm not perfect. And there have been times, and I'm sure in the future, there's going to be times that I scream. But at the same time, I want to be able to have a boundary for the most part in which I'm communicating in a manner that I'm not being screamed at and I'm not screaming either, right? Because we can't really receive in those domains. So what I'm going to move into next is what happens when we don't communicate our boundaries, right? Because they're communication skills and because they're ways that we communicate, when we don't communicate our boundaries, right, we shut down. We may feel depleted. We may feel exhausted. We may feel resentful. We may have an increase in anger. Our self-worth may decrease. Fear may increase. Doubt may increase. Anxiousness may increase. We even may have a meltdown, whether that's publicly or privately. So again, being able to purposefully set boundaries that are healthy and safe are truly important because they're able to help us communicate our needs. And it goes back to, effective communication skills. So how come boundaries are hard to set, right? For us, that boundaries are something that's a daily part of our life. We may not necessarily have to worry or think about that so much. But for others in which boundaries are new, or there's a boundary that you're working on, a good thing to talk about is how come a boundary is hard to set? Well, they're hard to set because oftentimes if we set them, okay, our bodies and brains begin to feel like that we're pushing up against our safety and security or our love and belonging. And that safety and security could be our job at work, right? Financial security, security of a job, or the love and belonging of a friend or a family member or a partner. So these boundaries sometimes that are needed, right, are hard to set because our wiring, our mental wiring, our emotional wiring, right, and our physical wiring are telling us that if we set those, that our safety, security, and our love and belonging may be at risk. And that also kind of is linked to the primitive brain. So when the boundaries are hard to set, one, we're pushing up against a threat that truly isn't a threat, but we feel like it. Secondly, we're operating more than likely in a truth that has been given to us and has become our truth, but it's not truly our truth. So where do these truths come from? Well, they come from society, right? I always ask people, how did you know that was true? Who told you that was true? Oftentimes what I get is, I don't know. I've just believed it and I've done it, right? So they have been given to us from a society at large. They've been given to us from our families, or these truths have been given us to us from people that have been influential or important in our lives. And we really haven't taken the time to really say, is that my truth? And is that truth right for me? So setting a boundary is hard because it's going against what we have thought has been our truth. So, and finally, a boundary is hard to set when we've had some type of life experience or challenge or trauma that's been linked to not setting that boundary. Okay. So let me give you an example. You're cool, you're able to set that physical space boundary, hands distance, whatever it may be, and you're good with your physical interaction. But you're not good at setting boundaries when things aren't okay. So when things aren't okay, or somebody does something at work that's not okay, or in your relationship that's okay, your go-to and your boundary has been to make it okay. Okay. Now that's a boundary that's probably more hurtful to you than it is helpful, and probably more hurtful to others than it is helpful, because you're truly not communicating your needs, and you're not communicating, in a way that's effectively getting you what you need. So let's say that you have a habit of making things okay when they're not okay, right? So let's go back to why that's hard to say that that's not okay. One, if you say that it's not okay, your body, your brain, your emotions may be saying, hey, you're risking your security at work. You're risking belonging to this relationship and being accepted, right? Or you're going against this truth that told you that your job and what you need to do when things aren't okay is to make it okay, right? That's your job. You need to make things okay. Or you've had an experience in life that when you didn't make things okay, blank hit the fan. So you don't want to go through that again, and you're going to jump in and make things okay as quick as you can, and so that you've got that level ground to operate from. So that's how come boundaries are hard to set, right? Is because it pushes up against our safety and security or our love and belonging, and acts that if we do that, it's going to be a threat, when in actuality, we do need the boundaries, right? It's kind of counterintuitive. It goes against the truth, or it's been rooted in an experience, a challenge, or a trauma in our life in which our wiring is telling us differently. So what do we do when we come across these boundaries that are hard to set? And eventually all of us are going to come across the boundary that's hard to set, because we're human, right? Well, the very first thing that I work with people on is to get some space in which you can reflect, right? You can reflect on, what boundary do I need to set that I'm not setting, right? Just ask yourself that and allow yourself to feel safe enough to answer it with yourself. Secondly, what am I worried about if I set this boundary that I know that's healthy, that I know that communicates my needs? Or what am I afraid of if I set this boundary? And let yourself answer those questions without any judgment, right? Without any judgment. So that way you're able to kind of begin to have this reflection on how come you haven't been able to set those boundaries, where it came from, when did you first learn that you had to make things okay when they weren't okay, right? That's our example that we're using. All right, so the first step is when boundaries are hard to set, what do? Is you reflect. How come it's hard to set this boundary? What am I worried about if I set it? What am I afraid of if I set it? Where did I learn that? Where did this come from? Okay. And once you're able to come to terms with that, then you can use this little formula. All right. So follow me on this. And it's like this. If you, and this is somebody else in your life, coworker, family, friend, whatever it is, if you blank, and in that first blank, I want you to put a boundary break. If you don't follow through, then I will blank, communicate your need, right? There's that communication skill, that communication of the need. If you don't follow through, then I will hold you accountable. If you don't follow through again, I will hold you accountable and limit the time that I'm around you. Now, your need may be different and your boundary may be different, and that's okay. But the formula is, if you, somebody externally, boundary blank, fill in that, if you blank, then I will blank, right? First blank is the boundary break. The second is you communicating your need, okay? So you're learning to set your needs based in communication and boundaries. So as you're learning this new boundary, be prepared that your body and your brain and your emotions are not going to like it. It's going to be weird. It's going to be foreign because it's new. So start slow, okay? Start at a pace that you're comfortable with. And it may be just you verbalizing that the boundary break has happened. That may be a great starting point. Then you can move into what you need, right? And you can practice this. If you blank, boundary break, then I will blank, communication of your need. You can practice that by yourself before you ever introduce it outside to anybody, whether that be in your professional environment, your personal environment, relationships, kids, whatever it may be. And also, again, start slow in a pace that's comfortable for you, because this is new and it's unfamiliar, and it's kind of weird. And also, as you set your boundary and you're learning more and more, don't be afraid to adjust it. You may not start with the best boundary, but it's a starting point, right? So adjust your boundary as you begin to learn more about communicating what you need and how come. So adjust that boundary as much as you need. The key to boundaries are follow through, whether those are boundaries with yourself. Remember the different categories of boundaries that I gave you. And one of my mental ones is not predicting the future. So I've got to follow through with that boundary with myself. And when I find myself breaking that boundary, I've got to know what to do to bring myself back in, or to set an accountability so that I stop doing that. So the biggest thing about boundaries, whether it's a boundary for yourself or a boundary that you're giving externally, is follow through, follow through, follow through. It's okay to re-advise it or adjust it, but make sure that you're following through. So this will conclude our talk about the truth about boundaries. And I'm sure there are 1,000 more truths. These are more so my truths and the use of boundaries in my life and how I use it in coaching. And I sure hope it was helpful. So just have some time thinking about your boundaries and know that there are ways that you communicate and their communication skills, but boundaries sometimes, when they're needed and not there, are also ways that we're not communicating what we need. All right, everyone. So that's a wrap, and it's Dr. Rebecca Cardona at Fear Nothing Coaching. I hope this was helpful.